Our second talk is today is on the pediatric blood component therapy in pediatric practices. So the speaker is Dr. Sirisha Rani Madam, consultant pediatric hemato-oncology and BMT specialist at Rainbow Children's Hospital, Hyderabad. So now I hand over the session to Sirisha Rani Madam.
Yeah, hi. Hi, good evening all. As we all know, blood components are important, integral and essential component of modern pediatric therapy, especially in inpatients, as well as at times like even outpatients when they come for OPD transfusions on daycare basis. So however, we need to go through like how the components are prepared, what are the different components, and then when do we transfuse them, what are the adverse reactions, how do we manage adverse reaction, and what is the need of being judicious with the blood transfusion. So always all these components we are going to see in this talk. So one thing I want to first say is like guidelines for blood component therapy are there in most of the textbooks. If you look at like neonatology or pediatric. However, I will say guidelines are there to guide us. We have to, as a clinician, we have to apply them for the clinical situation and then take a call accordingly. So if total body volume, we all know like is 70 to 75 ml per kg. So this is very important when we are calculating the rate of the blood transfusion what we are going to use. So before addressing or mentioning about this great physician from Austria, uh, called Landsteiner, I should not go forward because he is the one who introduced ABO blood group system to the world and then revolutionized the transfusion history. So in the blood bank, when the donor goes, like they collect the blood and then they through high spin and low spin, they separate the different components into PRBC, FFP, platelet-rich plasma, and then further into RDP, as well as cryoprecipitate, cryosupernatant plasma, etc. And then, of course, that will be utilized according to the clinical situation. So we will go through case scenarios and then we can go ahead and discuss the indications of component therapy. First and foremost case is a 10 years old boy. He has a GCS of 6 and he is on ventilator and he is also on inotropes. So he has acute encephalitis, he is on ventilator, and then at the same time he was also in shock, septic shock, and he was on 2 vasopressors. So in this kind of situation, will he get benefited from PRBC transfusion if his hemoglobin is 8? What are the indications for PRBC transfusion in this age group? We have to go ahead and look at the indications. So if you look at the indications, if you are on ventilation or on CPAP, the guidelines are different. So if you are on ventilation, you need a hemoglobin of around about 10, especially on vasopressin. And if you are looking at the child in the early part of the illness, so we have to go ahead and maintain good hemoglobin. And at the same time, if you are looking at if the child is on CPAP, then the hemoglobin, what we desire or what we need to maintain will come down. If, of course, if you are on oxygen therapy or if you are in room air, definitely the indication will go down and it goes down to less than 7, less than 8. This slide shows newborn and infants of less than 4 months recommendation, which is there in standard textbooks. So the cutoff definitely will be like higher in case of preterms or early infancy, because you can see that here the hemoglobin is around 12 when you are on ventilation. So that is the difference between when you're looking at a neonate versus a child. Going back again, if you look at the scenario, so this is a 10 years old child with hemoglobin of 8 who is in early part of his critical illness with hemoglobin of 8. So definitely is a candidate for transfusion. He is going to get benefited with the transfusion. So that is what is the answer for this case. And of course, if here again you have to look at like if the child is coming down with the vasopressors or inotropes and then child ventilation is very minimal and you are planning to wean off further, probably one can go ahead and wait for transfusion rather than rushing with the transfusion. So, and other than that, we have to remember, I mean, it's difficult to remember this complex formula. I will say like, you just have to remember the volume as 10 to 15 ml per kg. This is the volume what we regularly practice in the pediatric. However, for certain hematological cases like thalassemias and all, who are going to go through regular transfusion program almost throughout their life or until they get transplanted. So in those cases, we generally go for 15 ml to 20 ml per kg of a PRBC transfusion. So I think we already discussed this. So I'm going to skip this. How do you decide transfusion in chronic anemia? So generally for chronic anemias, for example, if you are looking at a child who is transfusion non-dependency thalassemia syndromes like NTDTs, thalassemia intermedia, or other NTDTs like HBE and other NTDTs, in those cases, you would like to maintain the hemoglobin above 7 with good growth parameters. So you also have to monitor their growth, and you have to ensure that their hemoglobin is above 7, and at the same time you have to ensure that there is no active extramedullary hemopoiesis in those children. So in chronic anemias, we always have to be careful. The 7 cutoff is just an arbitrary figure. We have to look at the, as a pediatrician, definitely you're aware, we have to be very careful with their growth and extramedullary hemopoiesis. And of course, there are situations where you will consider, even in chronic anemias, if you have an underlying cardiorespiratory function problems, or if the kid is on chemotherapy for cancer, or if you have a severe thrombocytopenia or bleeding diathesis where you want to keep the child with decent hemoglobin, so in those and where you are expecting that the ongoing bleeding is going to trouble further, so in those cases probably you have to go ahead and transfuse them. So transfusion in blood loss is another different entity. So here, will you transfuse in all blood losses? Definitely answer for majority of us know that, like, it is no. If the blood loss is less than 10-15% of the body volume, definitely you are not going to transfuse. If the transfusion, if the blood loss is around 15 to 20%, you will look at, like, is there any underlying problem? Do I need to transfuse? Is there any ongoing bleeding which is going to cause further volume loss? Hence, I have to go ahead. So in those situations, definitely, yes, you have to go ahead and transfuse. Otherwise, you can wait and watch rather than going for rushing with the transfusion. Anything above 20-25%, definitely we have to consider, especially if there is an ongoing bleeding. So transfusion for surgery is another different entity. As we know, transfusion for surgery is not just dependent only on the number we are looking at, that is hemoglobin percent. We also have to look at what is the nature of the surgery, what is the amount of blood loss that is expected, and of course patient clinical conditions and underlying comorbidities. So looking at all those things, we have to decide whether we are going to go ahead with the transfusion or not. Previously it was the cutoff was 8, now the cutoff is 7. So we should be aware of the change in the cutoff. So this is another case scenario. 10 months old baby who, definitely there is some failure to thrive, 6.4 kg at the age of 10 months, with significant respiratory distress, with significant tachycardia, but there is no cyanosis, severe pallor is there. So as hemoglobin is just 6, with a microcytic hypochromic picture. Do we need to transfuse this child? So how do we approach this case? So in this case scenario, it depends on when we are looking at the child. If you are looking at the child in the beginning of the illness where significant distress is there on oxygen, with severe tachycardia and pallor, and child being having already like failure to thrive, so in those cases, yes. But if you are looking at this child where the child is already in improvement trend with microcytic hypochromic picture, which says that child has underlying iron deficiency, so if the tachycardia is in downward trend, respiratory distress is gradually improving, and oxygen requirement is, you are able to wean off the oxygen, so in those situations definitely we know that there is no rush with the transfusion, because the peripheral smear says that it is a microcytic hypochromic picture rather than the different etiology. So in those cases, if the child improves, you can go ahead with even with the hematinics. And of course, as you can see in the scenario, child is not on any ventilation or inotropes and all. So looking at case 3, this is a preterm infant, 32 weeker, weighing 1200. gram, brought with feeding problems and poor weight gain. So as we have seen in the previous slide, if you can recollect, preterm baby with poor weight gain, who is underweight, uh, of course appropriate for the gestation, but preterm baby has significant pallor and tachycardia, hemoglobin of 7. So in this scenario, we know that definitely we are going to go ahead with the transfusion, because there are several indications here. So these are the guidelines what we have previously seen in the when we are discussing case 1. So we definitely here we are going to go ahead with the transfusion. So in neonates, these are the indications when we consider. So in you are on ventilation or CPAP or on oxygen or other factors like growth, apnea, weight gain. So everything we are going to take it into consideration when we are looking at the transfusion in preterms. So there are other factors like severe pulmonary disease or cardiac disease, where you would like to maintain good amount of hemoglobin, and then in those cases also you would like to go ahead with the transfusion program wherever it is required according to clinical situation. So this is one important thing what we all have to look at, like whenever we send the requisition form for small babies. So in those situations we always face, like we ask, the blood bank people always ask for mother's sample as well, because for small babies you have to match, especially less than 3-4 months. So you have to match with the mother as well, not just with the baby. However, in the RH group has to match with the infant. So we have to be aware of hematocrit of the blood bag, what we are giving, because you are dealing with the small babies in this kind of situation. And we always irradiate these blood products, even if it is PRBC, because it has to be CMV negative when we are handling the neonates, or even when we are looking at the situation where we are going to go for transplantation for any hematological conditions or malignancies. So in those situations, one has to irradiate. Other than neonates, those are the other indications. So we'll come to the irradiation indications later. So we never use PRBC to expand circulatory volume. Don't use it as a replacement for hematinics, and definitely not for wound healing, which was the old norm. Previously, people used to think that PRBC, good oxygenation, can heal the wound. Yes, it is true, but just to heal the wound alone, we should not transfuse, because there are other factors with which we can address that. And moving on to the next case scenario. This is 6 years old child who has decent hemoglobin of 9 and is in sepsis DIC, I should say, because platelets are low, total count is high, PT APTT is deranged, FDP is positive in this child, FDP and D dimers. He is on oxygen, and of course he is bleeding from the prick sites, and along with the NG bleeding. So here we know that the need here, blood product need here, is FFP, because your PT APTT are deranged, whereas platelets are above 50,000 and hemoglobin is above 8-9. So in this situation, there is no role of PRBC or platelets, but there is a role of FFP. So as long as how many blood products we are going to use in this child, I will say to begin with FFP alone, monitor the child, and then decide whether there is a need to go for PRBC and platelets, because looking at these numbers, there is no role of PRBC and platelets. So what are the indications of fresh frozen plasma? So one is in multiple so you have to divide like in inherited and acquired. In acquired, liver disorders with coagulopathy with bleeding, vitamin K deficiency with significant bleeding. Most of the vitamin K deficiencies, they reverse with vitamin K therapy alone. However, if they are not reversing with vitamin K therapy alone, with a significant bleeding problem in the early phase itself, then you may have to go ahead with FFP. Especially you are looking at IC bleed, GI bleed, where you want to stop the bleeding immediately, then you have to use FFP in vitamin K deficiency. Otherwise, skin bleeds and all, you can reverse with the vitamin K alone. Other than that, in acquired conditions, when do you consider FFP? As you can see, in all congenital factor deficiencies, like whether it is the factor 2, 5, 10, 11, 13. So these are all the factors which are there in good amount in FFP. So you can go ahead and consider that. And other than that, like your routine regular indications, like if you are in a hurry in reversing with warfarin effect, or you can also use it for TTP where you can do the plasma exchange. So generally, like in pediatric practice, you don't handle that, but you may handle sepsis DIC, liver disorders with coagulopathy, vitamin K deficiency, and definitely at times with the congenital factor deficiencies with bleeding. So in the past, people were using for hypoproteinemia as well as to expand the circulatory volume, and also in immunodeficiencies, FFP, but it is not indicated in those conditions. Definitely, it is contraindicated in congenital IgA deficiency. And coming to cryoprecipitate, as we have seen in the beginning, the way we separate. So when we hard spin it, you can get the cryoprecipitate, which can be stored up to 1 year at minus 18 degrees. It is rich in factor VIII, 13, 1 Willebrand factor, fibrinogen, and it is not. It does not contain factor IX. So that is one important point what we all need to remember. So one is like in FFP, you have factor VIII, factor IX. So when you are facing hemophilia, you should remember this point. In hemophiliacs, when you don't know whether it is 8 or 9, it is always like wiser to use FFP than cryoprecipitate. Whereas if you know that it is definitely 8, and then you don't have factor therapy available to stop the significant bleeding, one can go ahead and use the blood components in the absence of specific factors. In that case, cryo is useful in factor VIII deficiency. Other than that, hypofibrinogenemia is one other indication, and of course, it is rich in factor 13. So what is the dose? For every 5 kg, you need to use 1 bag. So 5 to 10 kg, 1 to 2 bags, we go ahead and use it. And in FFP, one has to be careful. It can precipitate trolley. So if you have a diseased lungs, pre-existing diseased lungs, in those cases, FFP can precipitate trolley. So we have to be aware of that point so that we can monitor the child properly. So indications, I think we have already discussed vitamin K deficiency, DICs, congenital factor deficiencies. There are certain indications. Once again, you can divide into acquired and inherited problems. And do you need to be group specific with FFP? With FFP, you don't need to be group specific. With the cryoprecipitate also, you don't need to be group specific. Sorry, with FFP, you need to be group specific, but no RH specific. Whereas with cryoprecipitate, so one has to receive ABO compatible with recipient. So that is one point what we need to remember. So, and whereas we have to remember that FFP will have antibodies. Again, so if you are not giving the group specific, there is a chances of hemolysis. So hence, going by that, in red cells can lyse. So we have to remember that that risk is there. So going by that, it's always better to go for group specific. But there is RH specific is not mandatory. One, if you get, it is good. So moving on to next case. This is 16 years old boy admitted with dengue shock. His platelets are very low, as you can see. He has hemoconcentration. His platelets are very low. There is no active bleeding from any side. Parents are in panic state, which we always face. However, what do you want to do here? Do you want to transfuse the platelets, or you don't want to transfuse the platelets? So if you question yourself, I will say definitely one can go ahead and counsel the parents rather than rushing with the platelet transfusion, because every transfusion has its pros and cons. So if there is a platelets are more prone for bacterial contamination, because you store platelets at 23 to 25 degrees centigrade. So that is the reason why platelets are more prone for bacterial contamination. You can get into serious transfusion reaction called as bacterial contamination. Hence, we have to avoid as much as possible if there is no bleeding in this kind of situation. WHO does not give any different cutoff for dengue fever for platelet transfusion. It is same cutoff like other cases, as long as, I should say, as long as you don't have associated coagulopathy. But if you have associated coagulopathy with 10,000, child is prone for bleeding. So then your answer is yes. So platelets are, as we all know, like platelets are into, we look at them as random donor platelets, single donor platelets, random donor platelets. You collect from different donors and then pool and give. At least 3 donors will be there in one random donor platelet transfusion, whereas in single donor, you are collecting from one donor. So it is, donor exposure is less, efficacy is high. So going by the single donor platelets are always recommended wherever it is required. Whereas in random donor platelets, efficacy is less, almost like 5 to 6 times less inferior compared to single donor platelets. What are the indications when you are considering platelets for children? So definitely you have to go ahead and look at these numbers. If you have a child who doesn't have any bleeding, you can wait even at up to less than 10,000. That is, we have just seen the scenario. Stable dengue, platelets are 10-15,000, no coagulopathy, fever is, there is no fever, then you can go ahead and wait for transfusion. Whereas if you have fever, then you would like to maintain the platelets above 20,000, not only for dengue fever, also for other infections. If you are looking at a child with platelets of around 20,000 with significant infection, definitely you would like to keep them above 20,000 so that you are reducing the risk of bleeding. So if you are looking at a child who requires invasive procedures like femoral line insertion or other central line insertions and all, then you would like to maintain the platelet count around 50,000. And in neurosurgical procedures and all, of course, it is like 75,000 to 1 lakh. So 1 lakh is the ideal situation. So in DIC, so the one thing I would like to say is in DIC, we always have to treat the patient, not the number. So platelet count and INR, these things have to be considered carefully when you are looking at the child with the DIC. So prophylactically, where do you give platelets? If you are going, for example, you have a chronic child who is having, whether it is whatever is the underlying reason, platelets are continuously low, and then child requires some surgical procedure. So these are the indications or numbers when how you go ahead and consider transfusions in these children. For example, you are looking at lumbar puncture, you are going to do lumbar puncture, or you are going to do bone marrow aspiration in a child who is on cancer treatment. So in that case, like for lumbar puncture, we ideally maintain around 50,000. For bone marrow, there is no threshold. So majority ask this question. So what is the cutoff for bone marrow aspiration? For bone marrow aspiration, there is no threshold that has been set. So one can go ahead and do the bone marrow and is at with aseptic process as under aseptic conditions, and then after that you can apply the pressure and then seal it, rather than transfer giving the prophylactic platelets and then doing the bone marrow. Whereas for lumbar puncture, we know that with low platelets it can bleed into the spinal space, and then it can cause subarachnoid space, and it can cause problems. So going by that, definitely we go ahead and give prophylactic platelets. So what are the contraindications? Definitely, if you are looking at a child with HIT, or it's not a contraindication for autoimmune thrombocytopenias. However, in ITP, there is no role of platelet transfusion. We know that. Thrombotic thrombocytic cytopenic purpura or other angiopathies, microangiopathies, if you are going to transfuse, it may aggravate the situation. Going by that, one has to consider carefully, like whether you have to really give platelets or not in that situation. So whereas if you are looking at a child with massive transfusion, if you are looking at a scenario where blood loss is heavy, then you get dilutional with colloids or crystalloids were pumping in with heavy blood loss. You can get dilutional thrombocytopenia, you can get dilutional coagulopathy. So in those cases, we have to be careful. We may set in DIC, so we have to be careful. It's not contraindicated completely, but we have to be careful, I will say. And platelet transfusion in neonates, it is different cutoffs. So for preterm baby, platelet transfusion, you have to maintain above 30,000 to avoid IVH. Whereas in term baby, so you need to go ahead and maintain above 20,000. So this is like an asymptomatic, completely asymptomatic baby. So whereas in other situations, in case if the neonate is actively bleeding, definitely we need to maintain the platelet count above 50,000. And leukoreduced platelets. Where do you use leukoreduced platelets? There are different methods to do leukoreduction. So one is you can use the red cell leukocyte filter when you are transfusing the blood. On the other hand, you can also irradiate the blood bag, or you can use saline. You can do saline wash. So there are various methods with which you can reduce the leukocytes, which because of which the transfusion associated reactions are less, especially transmission of infections like CMV and all will be very less in those cases, as well as um, other problems like febrile reactions also will be less. So irradiation of the blood products, irradiation of the blood products, as we just saw in neonates, definitely we need to irradiate. And then as well as when you are planning for transplantation, that is another situation where you have to irradiate. So if you are looking at a thalassemia child, so transplantation is not just the hematologist, but even for pediatricians also may be handling the transfusion dependent anemias like thalassemias. In those cases, definitely we have to go ahead and suggest the patients irradiated blood products, because they may be candidates for transplantation in the future. If we do irradiated blood products for transfusion dependent anemias like thalassemia, we can avoid GVHD in the future when they go for transplantations. Other than that, so other than bone marrow transplantation, other indications are congenital immunodeficiencies as well as neonates. So in the regular practice, so we will go for irradiated blood products. This is the irradiation technique 25 gray. So is the usual dose what you use for irradiation. So coming to important part of the talk, that is blood transfusion reaction. So if you look at blood transfusion reactions, acute reactions may occur in 2% as per the theory, but in practical world, we definitely face more amount of transfusion reactions. So blood transfusion reactions can be mild, which can get just limited to only skin as urticarial rash, pruritus, hypersensitivity and all, or it can be moderate with flushing, urticaria, restlessness, tachycardia, palpitations, dyspnea, and febrile reaction, etc. Or it can be life-threatening, where you may face hypotension, tachycardia, hemoglobinuria, tightness in the chest, headache, dyspnea, all these things. So different, you go ahead and divide them into different categories. So this is the important slide what we all have to remember. So this is because we face this situation day in, day out. Blood transfusion reactions, febrile transfusion reactions, most important blood transfusion reaction we face in our clinical practice is febrile transfusion reaction. That is because of the pre-release toxins in the blood bag. So you get the fever. Whenever you face this, you stop the blood transfusion for a short period, control the temperature, and give supportive care with acetaminophen if required with fluids, and then restart the blood transfusion. And second, the other important blood transfusion reaction is hemolytic transfusion reactions. In hemolytic transfusion reaction, the main cause is clerical error. It can be ABO incompatibility that can cause major hemolytic transfusion reaction. So this is a dreadful complication. We have to be very careful. We have to return the blood bag back to blood bank and then stop transfusion. Immediate vigorous crystalloid infusion has to be given, and one has to use diuretic therapy so that you are flushing out the transfused blood. And this is very important thing what we all have to remember. And next thing is allergic reaction. So this can be because of the antibodies in the donor's plasma. So you like this is it can manifest as urticaria or hives, and you can go ahead and give antihistaminics and then try to restart. But if you get severe reaction, as we have seen in the previous slide, severe reactions, it's not just urticaria, but urticaria, restlessness, tachycardia, all these things, if they are there, definitely you go ahead and abandon the transfusion, stabilize the child, and you may consider with the different blood bag. But if it is limited to only cutaneous, then probably you can slowly restart and then see. But if you get recurrence, you have to go ahead and stop the transfusion and return the back to blood bank. And transfusion related acute lung injury. This is one important thing what we all have to remember. TRAWLI is because of anti-neutrophilic antibodies that get deposited in the lungs, and then that can trigger the cytokines release into the lungs and then result in ARDS kind of picture. So there is no evidence to use steroids in advance for this kind of situation. However, if you get into this problem, then we have to go ahead and manage exactly with like an ARDS. You have to go ahead and stop the transfusion first of all, give nebulizations, give furosemide, and then go ahead and give use hydrocortisone along with antihistaminics. And TRAWLI is generally seen with FFP in a pre-existing lung disease lung. That is, you have a pneumonia and you also have a sepsis pneumonia child where coagulopathy is there. You are giving FFP to control bleeding secondary to coagulopathy. So in that case, you may face TRAWLI more often compared to healthy lung when you are using only for sepsis DIC, but lungs are healthy. That chances of TRAWLI are less. So, and there is another entity called as transfusion associated gut injury. So this happens usually with the neonates. The mechanism is same. Anti-neutrophilic antibodies are the main culprits. That is the reason why you stop the feeding when you are giving transfusion in neonates, especially in preterm babies, to avoid transfusion associated gut injury. This can manifest as like feed intolerance mainly. So we have to be careful in monitoring for the feed intolerance whenever we give transfusion for small preterm babies. Another transfusion reaction is delayed transfusion reaction. This is secondary to minor blood group incompatibility. So this can manifest any time between 3 days to 3 weeks post transfusion. Usually it comes out as a hemoglobinuria, and then there will be drop in the hemoglobin in these cases. The desired increment you don't see post transfusion in these children. So this delayed transfusion reaction is secondary to minor blood group incompatibility. Transfusion associated graft versus host disease is another condition. This is a fatal condition. One has to be very careful when you are transfusing children without any definite indication, because you can get, especially when you are using the family person as a donor. So that is the main risk factor for transfusion associated graft versus host disease. We have seen a scenarios where kids received blood transfusion for nutritional anemia, as it was severe, around 5 to 6 hemoglobin from dad, and then child presented with severe pancytopenia, and it's a fatal condition. So mortality for transfusion associated graft versus host disease is 95%. Wherever there is indication, definitely we have to go for transfusion, but we have to be careful that we need to avoid family donors. So because of the risk of transfusion associated graft versus host disease when we are doing the blood component therapy. So these are the other life-threatening reactions. So I'm not going into details as we discussed most of them. So whenever you are looking, another complication of massive blood transfusion I want to mention is like whenever you are facing a massive blood loss. In that kind of situation, you may be coming up with a pumping of blood products. You may be coming across various problems like acidosis, hyperkalemia, hypocalcemia, and citrate toxicity, and depletion of coagulation factors because of the dilutional component that is there, and depletion of platelets, DIC that may set in, hypothermia. So we have to be careful when we are handling massive blood transfusions, especially in situations like acute blood loss and all. So thank you all. The main message is like you have to use blood products judiciously. Definitely we have to go ahead and use wherever it is required, but we have to be careful that for every transfusion associated reaction, physician is accountable. So that is the reason why we have to be careful and choose the blood product wisely rather than going for whole blood transfusion. There are blood components that are available, so we have to go ahead with the blood component therapy. Thank you. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for the wonderful talk. So, ma'am has clearly explained what when to transfuse, avoid unnecessary transfusions, and what are the most common complications being faced during the transfusions. So we will fastly wind up with the questions now. So yeah, then I think we can deal with the questions for Shirisha madam. Yes, ma'am. Actually many of the questions are based on FFP as what I can read on.
Okay.
Yeah, so first scenario which they have given, ma'am, twin pregnancy. I think this is clear, but I think they may need a repeat query. Twin pregnancy, preterm. So the twins are 1.2 kg, and the hemoglobin of one child is 9 grams and other is 11 grams. So should we transfuse both? Both are actually doing well, no issues on breastfeed. Do we transfuse both or only transfuse one and not the other? That is the question which they have put on.
So it depends on the day of life. As we know, preterm babies like less than 15 days or less than 10 days, definitely you would like to keep the hemoglobin above 11, 12. So the baby who, if you are looking at within 10 to 15 days of life, if hemoglobin is around 9, what you are saying for the first baby, I will go ahead and give transfusion. For the second baby who has 12, definitely we can wait. Whereas if you're looking at after 10-15 days of life and baby is feeding well, it is expected to drop from that age onwards. Like, as we know, in the fetal life is a hypoxic status. That is the reason at birth we will have very high hemoglobin. So hemoglobin will be to the tune of 16 to 18. However, after birth, like it gradually drops, and then there are different others, like at the end of 2 months for preterm, at the end of 4 months for term. However, in the situation what you are giving, so if I'm looking at the baby after 10-15 days of life, hemoglobin is 9, and then baby is feeding well, gaining weight, definitely I will go ahead and monitor rather than rushing with the transfusion. For the second twin, I will wait for transfusion rather than rushing with the transfusion.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. I think that has cleared the query. And the next question is, what is the role of FFP, ma'am, in nephrotic syndrome with severe hypoproteinemia? Like, can we use FFP in nephrotic syndrome where there is severe
So
hypoproteinemia?
Okay. So as we know in the olden days, like in previous practice, people were using FFP to replace protein in case of hypoproteinemias. But currently it is one of the contraindication for hypoproteinemias we don't use. However, it's not an absolute contraindication because you have a other alternative. You have albumin transfusion. So for hypoproteinemia, you can very well use that component rather than using the FFP. So because FFP has definitely more reactions compared to your albumin, so going by that, one has to use albumin in nephrotic syndrome with hypoproteinemia rather than FFP.
Yes, ma'am. And one more question, ma'am,
Of
related to
course,
FFP.
there are indications when you use albumin and all. So that's a different discussion when you go for albumin infusions in nephrotic syndrome and all.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. And one more question. Role of FFP in moderate grade hemophilia A before minor surgery.
So FFP in previous days, like there were no recombinant factors. So those times people were using FFPs, but now we are in the era where recombinant factors are easily available, either through hemophilia societies or through government supply. There are many government hospitals who are supplying the factor free of cost. So in that situation, definitely it is more wiser to go for recombinant factor rather than going for FFP. But we are in a desperate situation where there is no availability of factor and child has to go for surgery. So in that case, yes, one can go ahead and use the FFP rather than waiting for component to come and then child to get deteriorated. One can go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. And I think last question we would take because of time constraints. I think that is put. So after, I mean, we have got a fever during the transfusion. So then why again do we restart the transfusion after the control of the fever? I think they put the question. Yeah. Why is transfusion resumed after control of fever if it occurs during the transfusion itself?
So, okay, transfusion associated febrile reaction, what mainly they are asking for. So fever during transfusion can be two reasons. One is because of the pre-release toxins in the blood bag. So that can cause febrile reaction. Then you can go ahead and control it with the paracetamol or acetaminophen, and then go ahead and restart the transfusion. Since you are already given acetaminophen, again, like, next time again getting the fever, the chances of getting fever are low. So that is like, understandable kind of thing. But the other reason for fever when you are giving transfusion is bacterial contamination of the blood bag. That can occur with the FFP or platelets, more with platelets, or even with PRBC. So in that kind of situation, we have to be very careful. We have to immediately stop the transfusion, return the blood bag, take the culture from blood bag, culture from child, and then start broad spectrum antibiotics, because this is a dreadful complication. How do we differentiate between simple febrile reaction versus bacterial contamination? In bacterial contamination, child will be more sick. You will have fever, retching, vomitings, hypotension, significant tachycardia, vitals will change. So in that kind of situation, we know that we are facing category 3 in the table what I have shown. In category 3, you have to stop the transfusion, differ from that blood bag, discuss with your blood bank, and if it is fever and you are suspecting bacterial contamination, you also have to go ahead and start the antibiotics along with the supportive care like fluids and circulation restoration and all.
Thank you, ma'am. That was clear. I think the few questions which
I can see one question. They're related to platelets. How frequently we have to transfuse the SDP for a neonate? So what I will address is, like, of course, it depends on the indication we are giving transfusion for. Once you give SDP, as the quality of SDP and increment post SDP is good, we expect it at least 50 from the baseline. For example, you are transfusing at 15, 20,000. It goes beyond 70,000, provided there are no active factors like autoantibodies or active bleeding where platelets can get consumed. So in those cases, definitely the increment is going to be good. Once you achieve, when you know that there are no associated other problems, but you are transfusing because baby is preterm or other indications, so in those cases, you can go ahead and recheck next day. Whereas you have other comorbidities or active bleeding, then you may want to go ahead and check after 12 hours. But don't check within 4 to 6 hours, because it can give false reassurance. So we have to give enough of time and then recheck, rather than checking very a closer gap and then get a false reassurance.
Yes, ma'am. So I think we have cleared most of the queries, and few questions which have been asked, I think they are being dealt in the slides as well. So we may not take them again.
Yeah, you can read out, like, if they're
Actually, this question, should we give antihistaminic, steroid, and diuretic before every blood transfusion?
No, before every blood transfusion, it is not routinely indicated. Only if you have documented previous allergies with blood transfusions. For example, kids who are going for repeated transfusions like thalassemias, or kids who are on chemotherapy for cancer treatment. So in those cases, if you have documented previous allergic reactions, then it is indicated to give antihistamines and steroids before transfusion. Otherwise, it is not routinely indicated for every transfusion, especially when you know that there are no previously documented allergies.
So I think we have dealt with the major of the questions. So I think we would conclude the session. So I thank you. I thank the speakers, both the speakers, for spending time on a Sunday evening and having a detailed discussion on two very good important topics which we are facing day in and day out. And I thank all the participants for involving them. We could see around 270 to 80 participants were there. So I thank all of them, and I thank the organizer for organizing it. So yeah, it was a good webinar, good discussion. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Srikanth, and thank you all.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you, Dr. Srikanth, and thank you all.